So just before we get started and I hand over to our host and guest speaker, I just wanted to cover a couple items. So Parkland is a family owned and operated and has been operating for over 30 years. We have 14 campuses in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Ontario, with new properties underway in Ajax and Ancaster in Ontario. So we offer a full continuum of lifestyle options for seniors. So that means you can have peace of mind knowing that additional services and care are available should you need them. Whether you're looking for an independent apartment with access to services and amenities, or you require that little bit of extra supportive care, you can live comfortably knowing that additional services, friendly staff, and professional care are always nearby. And something you may not know, so Shanx, which is the parent company of Parkland, announced last month that it will seek ISO 50001 certification within 2 years and is on track to be the first senior living organization to receive ISO certification in Canada. So this is one step to move the company to be more environmentally friendly by increasing energy efficiency and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it's very exciting. So without further ado, I will hand over to Grace Meekshaw, the lifestyle consultant at Parkland and Glen, who's our gracious host this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well on this nice sunny day here in Ontario. I'm very pleased today to host our session. We're going to be talking about appraisals today. So I'm very pleased to introduce Julie Riches of Riches Appraisals. So I just want to give a little bit of a bio about Julie as to why we have her here as the expert. So having worked within the decorative arts industry for over a decade, Julie has amassed a broad range of knowledge across many disciplines. Her understanding of ever-changing market has proven essential when managing estates and private collections. Her clients include private collectors, historical institutions, insurance companies, financial institutions, corporations, law firms, executors, real estate agents, and property management groups. Julie is a member in good standing with the International Society of Appraisers and is on the executive committee of the Canadian chapter of the ISA. She serves as a board member for the Canadian Society of Decorative Arts and is the chair of the Communications and Publications Committee at the CSDA. Julie is also the vice chair of the Antiques, Furnishings, and Decorative Arts Committee of the ISA. Julie is the principal of Riches Appraisals and Consult, located in Clarkson, Ontario. Riches Appraisals offers a wide variety of services to clients, specializing in the field of decorative arts with a focus on silver, porcelain, glass, textiles, furniture, coins, clocks, watches, and jewelry. So that's a little bit about Julie. So Julie, welcome to this Parkland Live series. Thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. So you're going to have a little bit of a presentation that you're going to provide to us. I think the first we'd like to get started with, what is your services as an appraiser? What does that really mean?
Yeah, so I get into a little bit more in the actual presentation, but basically with a qualified appraiser, we provide a few different services, object identification, we do asset assessment, we do appraisal reports, but those are probably I would say the main three that we oversee. Consignment management, sales consultation, so for people who are curious about maybe selling something, but they don't know what it is, what the value is, and where to start.
Okay, perfect. So did you want to start off with your presentation then and talk about the appraisal process?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry,
Sure.
Julie. I was just going to say, anyone who has any questions, there is the chat function that Winnie mentioned that you can write in your question. Everyone is on mute during the presentation. So if there's a question, please just put in the chat. After Julie's presentation, we'll do a bit of a Q&A for anyone who has anything in particular to ask. Okay, Julie, take it away, please.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And thanks again for the opportunity to participate in the series. I think the concept of what Parkland and ChanX has done here is a great one. And I really wish that all my clients had the opportunity to hear from specialists and experts. You know, I've not been the first in the series. So kudos to you guys. I think you've done a good job with that. So just wanted to mention that. Absolutely. So what I would like to do is to start by providing a bit more information about what qualified appraisers like myself, what we do. And then we'll move through a series of slides that will touch on services. We'll do a step-by-step breakdown of the appraisal process. And we'll also address the current market, which is probably the most interesting of the three. And then we're going to open it up, as Grace said, to questions from the audience. So yeah, as Grace mentioned, my name is Julie Riches. I'm a personal property appraiser as opposed to a real property appraiser that deals with real estate. So I'm what's known as a generalist appraiser, which just means I know a lot about a lot, essentially. I do have a specialization in decorative arts, but I'm what's known as a generalist. I started in the auction industry about 15 years ago. And I worked primarily with glass, silver, ceramics, and militaria. So that's kind of how I got started in the industry. And then I've worked with several Canadian auction houses, both here in Ontario and then also in Alberta. So I have a good understanding of the Canadian market from a fine arts and a decorative arts perspective. And then I launched my own appraisal firm in 2017. And since then, I've been working with private clients to provide, you know, a variety of services. So I think that will bring us to our first slide. So hold on just a moment and I will get that going.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Let's move this out of the way. Okay, so again, welcome to session 3 of Parkland's live series. Today, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about the world of appraisals and why it's important to work with someone who is qualified. So I thought I would begin today by providing an overview of the types of services that my company provides. So object identification, which we touched on. And this is for clients who want to know more about the history of an object, maybe the maker, the age, the material. You know, sometimes clients reach out and they want to know more about a family crest that's on a piece. And then, of course, the big question, which is always, you know, what's it worth? What's the value? We also offer a sales consultation for clients who are looking for feedback on the best avenues of sale. Consignment management, and that's yet another service that's related to the sale of items. And this is something that's well suited for individuals who are looking for someone else to do the legwork on their behalf. Independent appraisers like myself, we have a network of professional connections in the industry, and so our clients really rely on us to be their eyes and their ears, so to speak. So I connect with both private collectors and auction houses on behalf of a particular piece or that particular collection. And then finally, appraisal reports, which can be produced for a number of reasons and for various circumstances. Because I'm a qualified appraiser and a member of the ISA, all of my appraisals are what's called USPAP compliant, and they meet a certain set of standards. Now, USPAP is the recognized ethical and performance standards for the appraisal profession. And so I just want to take a really brief moment to impress on everyone here that if you seek the advice of an appraiser, at minimum, you should make sure that they are USPAP compliant. Okay, so I've listed a few reasons here why individuals may look to have an appraisal report drafted for personal property. And the reason I do this is because I think when the average person hears the word appraisal, they think of like the Antiques Roadshow. And that's not incorrect, but you know, that's more of a kind of fast track made for television process that doesn't necessarily provide an accurate overview of what we do in full. And so assigning a dollar amount to an object is only one facet of the appraisal business. So again, I presented just a short list of some of the reasons clients may require an appraisal report. So firstly, for those individuals who are downsizing, or maybe you're in a situation where a power of attorney is involved, you may seek to have what's called an asset assessment of assets. Secondly, clients who are looking to update their homeowners policies, they may be looking to have certain pieces appraised for what's known as insurance coverage. And then the flip side of that is if an object has sustained damage, let's say again you're downsizing and a mover accidentally breaks a piece, or your clock comes back and the pendulum's gone, even if something gets stolen and it no longer exists, appraisers are called in to produce a report for an insurance claim. Also, appraisal reports for family division or probate, that's needed in estate situations. And then finally, charitable donations. So yet another time when appraisals are called in to produce a report, and this can be at the request of the donor, so the person who's actually the owner of the piece who's making the donation, or the organization that is set to receive the gift. And so there's certainly other situations that call for working with a professional appraiser. There's bankruptcy, equitable distribution, but for the purpose of the talk today, I think this provides a pretty good overview. Okay, so next I want to quickly review a few steps in the appraisal process. It's actually quite simple. The first step is to take photographs of the item or the collection of items that you'd like to have appraised. And I've actually created a photography tip sheet for everyone in attendance today. And it's a document that I provide to my clients who are looking for feedback or looking for advice on how to photograph certain objects. It can be tricky when there's a print behind glass and there's a glare, or say it's a porcelain piece and there's an impress mark at the bottom. Silver reflects light, so that can also be kind of tricky. So I've created a series of tips for people, and as I mentioned before, Grace has that actual tip sheet, so if anyone is interested, I'm sure we'll provide her information at the end of this talk, and you can certainly circle back. As far as taking photographs go, I would suggest that if it's something large, like a piece of furniture or a big clock or something like that, ask a friend or a family member to help, because you do need two hands. It can be kind of tricky, with photographs and whatnot. And right now, obviously being in Canada with COVID, submitting photographs is sometimes your only option at this point. Okay, so first step, take photographs. Second step, schedule an on-site inspection and examination. So once an appraiser has reviewed your photographs, you'll want to schedule a time for an on-site visit. And this is when the object or collection of objects are viewed in person. Measurements are taken, weights for objects containing gold or silver or platinum. Those are also noted, as well as any condition issues that may exist. And that's just our way of saying, like, has it been restored? Is it damaged? Is it brand new? That type of thing. And again, a qualified appraiser will more than likely ask to see an item in person before assigning a value. And for the purposes of insurance, we have to verify that the object actually exists. So there are times where an appraiser will need to see the piece in person before they can assign a value. And then the final step in the process is the report. And appraisal reports that are written to the industry standards will contain photographs, descriptions, dates, measurements, provenance, the basics. But it will also contain a market analysis and a methodology which supports how the appraiser has arrived at that value conclusion. So, for example, as a qualified appraiser, I can't just say this item is worth X. I have to say it's worth X based on these factors. And that's why, again, at minimum, you want to make sure that you're working with someone who is qualified to generate these types of appraisal reports on your behalf. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the market and why it's important for you to have an understanding of the different types. So, items that are offered for sale in galleries are a good example of what's called the primary market. And these prices, they're not sales results, they're asking prices. They represent typically, but not always, they're higher than the sales results that you'll see at auction or by way of consignment. So that's the primary market. Secondary market is, again, auction houses, consignment stores, things such as that. And then you have eBay, which is actually a good example of both. So if you're conducting your own research and you see someone is selling a set of dishes, let's just say on eBay for $500, you might think, oh gosh, mine's worth $500. I have a bigger set. Mine might even be worth $750. Well, keep in mind that sellers can ask whatever they want. It doesn't mean that that's the actual value of the piece. So a more realistic indication of value is through eBay auctions. So along the left side of eBay, there is a little tab for auctions. You can click pieces that have actually been sold. And so again, that gives you more of a realistic indication of what these pieces have actually sold for in the secondary market, as opposed to an asking price on the primary market. Also with eBay auction, it provides a date of the post and the date of the sale. So, okay, has this been posted for 2 years and it only got 1 bid? Has it been posted for 2 weeks and it got 10 bids? You know, it gives you a better indication of what's desirable. And so, you know, why this is important within any given collection, there are usually pieces that are well suited to be offered through auction or consignment, and then others that are well suited and would garner, frankly, a higher dollar value through a private sale. And a good example of this is coins. So the value for silver and gold and platinum, again, is primarily or largely based on spot price. And so if you decided to sell your coin collection through auction or consignment, you're automatically going to have costs associated with the sale of those objects. So there are commission structures, and they can be as little as 10% if you're lucky and it's a fabulous collection, and it can be as high as 45, 50% sometimes. There's also photography fees, insurance charges. It's usually 1% is the industry standard. So not a lot, but those are all factors that you have to consider when you're selling something. And so this is when a collector or a dealer, in my opinion, would be a better fit. You know, you'll circumvent those costs and you'll receive, you know, payment directly to you. And as long as you're working with someone who's reputable and knowledgeable, you know, you're in good hands. So again, this is another benefit of working with a qualified appraiser who has your best interest at heart, unbiased, and we have no vested interest in the properties being sold. Okay, so now let's talk about some fun stuff. So let's review a few items of personal property that have sold in the recent past and talk about, you know, briefly, the factors that make all the difference in the selling prices. So on the screen on the left, we have a group of antique glass and crystal decanters. And on the right, we have a Waterford Lismore pattern ships or captain's decanter. Now on the left, I mean, I see some that's probably, you know, late 19th, early 20th century. I can check the condition. They're all in great condition. So it's a nice variety. Feel like you get more for your money. Well, why did this 4 sell for 80 and the 1 sell for 450? Well, in this case, the pattern and the maker is what drives up the value. So Lismore pattern in particular by Waterford is very desirable within the current market. Also, Waterford is one of those companies that has kept true to their patterns, so, and their sizes of their patterns. So if you own a set of wine stems or highballs, you know, they've been passed down through your family and one breaks and you need a replacement, their patterns have not changed, their sizes haven't changed, nothing's been discontinued, and they're still being produced today. So that's why the price for things like Waterford have remained really strong within the current market. Moving on to porcelain examples. So again, on the left, we have an assortment of English porcelain teacups and saucers. And on the right, we have another English porcelain teacup and saucer, but just one. It's by Royal Crown Derby. It's a Mari pattern, and it's actually mismatched. That cup doesn't even go with that saucer, so they're not even meant to be sold as a set. The sales results show us that the grouping on the left sold for 60. The one on the right sold for 250. Again, why? Well, like the Waterford decanter, the pattern is what is significant. And so the color palette shown in the Amari pattern on the right is desirable to both contemporary and traditional porcelain collectors. So that's very significant. And further, Royal Crown Derby introduced date ciphers that started around 1880. So we're able to date these pieces back to the exact year of production. So if you have a 1935 set and you want to make sure that it's true, you can seek this out and make sure that your set is complete. So again, another reason why Royal Crown Derby Amari, that particular pattern, sells very well. And then lastly, we have 2 sales results for pieces of furniture. Again, on the left, we see a beautiful, solid mahogany, 19th century, and it sold for a very meager $200. On the right, we see it's not even a dinner table, it's more of like a large side table, I would say, sold for $850. Again, why? Well, the table on the right is more desirable in today's market for a few reasons. Size, as I mentioned, plays a role when we consider that we're all living in smaller spaces these days. Function is another big part of it. A lot of families don't do the sit down, how was your day, dear, kind of dinner any longer. Unfortunately, that's just not the lives that we live any longer. And then also, style plays a significant role, and mid-century design pieces are all the rage. So, the teak and the rosewood that everyone used to have in their basements in the 70s and the 80s, they're now selling for top dollar, and they have been for quite some time. And if you're lucky enough to have a Scandinavian or Danish piece of mid-century modern that can be attributed to a certain designer, well, then you will more than likely be looking well into the thousands. And here's an example of that. So here we see an example of a Danish teak table by a well-known furniture maker named Finjul. As you can see, this sold for $8,200. And I should mention that is just for the table. That's not even for the chairs, just the table. And so again, that's why it's important to work with individuals and organizations who know what to look for. In cases like these, they might not even have a label. A lot of times it's fallen off. And so it's important that you work with someone who has a trained eye that can recognize the form. And I just want to follow up 2 more slides. So here are a few examples of sales results for clients that I have worked with. And these are sales results that we've achieved in 2020 and 2021. So just within the last 6 to 8 months. So again, we'll go left to right. So on the left is an enameled silver figure. Kind of weird. I mean, not everyone's taste, that's for sure. It's a little odd. Certainly wasn't the client's taste, but it's the designer that makes this piece desirable. So Gene Moore worked for Tiffany, and he created these kind of, again, weird and wacky circus figures, and they're highly sought after by collectors. And you can see that the hammer price was $9,000, which is, I mean, the weight of it, you're probably looking at like low hundreds. So again, it has nothing to do with the composition. It's all about the maker that makes the collectability. In the center of the screen is a color lithograph, which is just a fancy word to say print. So it's a print. And this is by Joseph Albers. This is his homage to the square in red. And it sold for $13,500. Now, shortly before this went up at auction, an article was written by the Guggenheim, I believe, and they told a story of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who had just passed away a few weeks before, and how this particular artist, Joseph Albers, was one of her favorites. And in fact, a work not unlike this one in the same series, so red, just like this, just later in the series, hung on the wall in her chambers. And the reason I mention this is because this was most certainly a huge factor in the price that UC achieved. The auction estimate was $3,000 to $5,000. That's what it should have sold for. That's what it normally would have sold for. But again, because what's going on in the market, and you have to pay attention to those things, that's why it sold for the price that it did. And then finally, on the right, we see a Tudor watch. And it's hard to tell in the slide probably, but the details of the photograph aren't that great, but it was not in great shape at all. As you can see, kind of along the right side, so the black enameling and the number is kind of gone. It's been rubbed away, so it's been worn a lot. There's a big scuff mark at the bottom of the actual face of the watch itself. And so the gentleman who owned it, he could remember his grandfather wearing it. He remembers his dad wearing it. And it was passed down to him, and it just wasn't his style. And so he reached out to me and he said, does this have any value? Well, in fact, definitely had value. And again, this is an example of something that's highly collectible. Luxury watches are something that have been going strong. Actually, they've been doing even better since COVID for other reasons that we won't get into. But again, the condition didn't matter. People want it, they'll pay for it. I mean, this is a style that's actually been produced again more recently. And it's actually called the home plate model, because the shape of the hour marks are not unlike, the home plate in baseball. So that's kind of its sort of name with collectors. Further to that, this piece was featured in a specialty watch auction. And that's one of the reasons that it fared so well. Again, it's important to work with people who realize that you need proper exposure. If you're going online with auctions, which a lot of them are now, 3 weeks is kind of a minimum that I suggest for my clients to make sure that these pieces are online. And that's because you want to expose yourself to an international market. And you need time for those underbidders to kind of drive the price up. So, and I should mention that these pieces came from private clients who reached out to me just to have appraisals, and they're all Canadian. So these are very recent. I'll turn it back over to Grace.
Thanks, Julie. That was really informative. Actually, a couple of questions that kind of popped up during your presentation. One is you're talking about these unexpected values of things. So, you always hear about people going to garage sales and buying something for $1, and it turns out to be worth thousands. So how does someone know if what they have in their possession is valuable or not? Like, do they have to keep on second guessing all the time, or?
I would say reach out to an appraiser. Most people like myself are not gonna, everyone's different. What I do for clients is to say, start out with the photograph. And that's why I gave everyone the photograph tip sheet. Start with that. I'll do a bit of preliminary research. And most of us, we have enough experience. We could take a look and we'll know whether it warrants more research or not. And if it doesn't, we can just say, it's a lovely piece. It's not worth a ton. Keep it, love it, use it, and kind of, move on. And the reason I say reach out to someone obviously who's qualified is because it gets confusing. Again, when you go on eBay or you go on some of these sites and you see what it's sold for, an untrained eye, you can't tell the difference, the subtle differences that makes this one sell for thousands and this one pass in an auction. So I always say, if you have questions, reach out. That's why we're here.
Okay, perfect. So there's a couple of questions that came up on the chat. So the first one is, how do I get the photography tip sheet during the appraisal process? So that's through me, Grace. So I'll type in my email address, and if you want to send me a note, and then I can email that tip sheet off to you. So thank you for that question. Another question that's come in, Julie, is how important is it to keep original receipts?
So that's a really good question. And that goes to establish what we call provenance. And I don't want everyone to think that it's so important to save all your receipts. I mean, if you are a piece of art and you have the gallery label on the back, that is great. That's what we're looking for. If you have original receipts, wonderful. But, we don't expect people to have, and sometimes they do. Sometimes clients have the original handwritten receipt, from the 20s or before that. Sometimes we use photographs of a family member holding an object or standing near an object, and we can tell by their attire and maybe where they're standing, to provide a little bit of information as far as the date goes. So I would say any information that you can remember or that to be true, feel free to jot it down, but don't go overboard and feel like you have to save every single piece of paper, because it's just not necessary.
Perfect. Okay, another question. Do you recommend getting equitable assets RE appraised periodically based on market value, trends, etc.? If so, how often would you recommend doing this?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, if you just want to know for asset assessment, then I would say it depends on what it is. I mean, it's hard to kind of answer that with, if we're looking at art, let's just say, for example, you own a particular artist and his or her works typically sell around 5,000. Then all of a sudden you notice that makes a big jump and the work starts selling for 10,000 or 8,000. Well, then yeah, it's a really good idea to have your appraisal updated. We do say for insurance coverage, we typically recommend every 3 to 5 years. Again, that is for, you know, higher dollar value. If it's just general household content, like I myself might own a handful of things that need to be reappraised every 3 to 5 years. I think it just depends on what's within the collection. But again, when you work with an appraiser, typically, you know, they'll circle back to you in 3 or 5 years and say, you know, that appraisal we did, I noticed XYZ. Again, we keep our eyes on the market. You know, it's a good time to, it's a good idea to have things updated. So generally speaking, I'd say every 3 to 5 years. But if we're talking about, you know, porcelain and glass and ceramics and things that have been pretty tried and true, then that time will change, I would say.
Okay. And then a follow-up question to that is it ever a good idea from an appraisal standpoint to break up a partial set to sell something individually, or is it better to keep it appraised as a partial set?
Again, it depends. If we're talking about like a 19th century salon suite, no one really appreciates those too much any longer, unfortunately. So if you wanted to keep 2 of the chairs and even reupholster them, you know, that's great. Use them, love them. I don't think breaking up a set for something like that, or even, you know, like bedroom suites, they're not really selling. And again, this is a general kind of overview. There are exceptions to these rules, obviously. It's in True Modern, like we talked about before. But sometimes it's actually a hindrance to sell a big, massive table with 10 chairs. I mean, it's not uncommon for auction houses in particular to break them up, and they get a higher dollar value with the 10 chairs separate from the table. Another thing that I've noticed auction houses do, and sometimes it's a good move, if you have a really large landscape, like a big European 19th century landscape, and it's got that beautiful kind of gilt ornate frame to it, it might be tough to sell both. So sometimes what they do is they sell the artwork on its own. They sell the frame on its own. Designers like to use the frame for mirrors, things like that. So again, as a client, you want to work with people who know what they're doing so that they're getting you top dollar.
Fair enough. And actually, you were talking about different items and such, and evaluating 3 or 5 years. Currently right now, what is the most sought off items currently being auctioned or sold?
Well, funny enough, sneakers. I know that sounds strange. Sneakers.
Used, you mean?
Well, some of them have been used. Yes. Yes. Some of them have been purchased as an investment, worn once, put back in the box. Oh yeah, millennials are going, and I'm not talking about, you know, millennials that live at home with their parents that can't afford. I mean, like big money. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars are being spent on footwear. Handbags, luxury handbags. Hermes is, I mean, the Birkin bag and the Kelly bag. I actually just sat in on a presentation about that a couple days ago. It's, again, people are buying them as an investment. I can't afford one, but if I did, I would buy one and I wouldn't touch it, because I know that I think the comparison was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the artist Banksy, but Birkin bags actually hold a higher value, resale value in the market than a Birkin bag does. So luxury hand goods, I would say, I want to say the weird and the wonderful, but what we just saw, that Super Mario Brothers, video games, gaming consoles, Pokemon cards. I mean, things that you just wouldn't even imagine. I think the majority of us would think of, you know, furniture and glass and silver and all the things that we were kind of in our mind when we use the term decorative arts. That's kind of what pops up. And some of those things do still hold, you know, significant value. But the weird and kind of, like I said, the wonderful is what's doing really well. And the millennials they're a driving force, strangely enough, in the market right now. So that's part of it.
Interesting. I always, because my husband opened up all the Star Wars figurines, and now they're just in display, so they're not in the original packaging. We could be rich, but alas, no. Also, I have another question here. How do you determine whether or not a letter of authenticity is genuine?
So a letter of authenticity is kind of a dead giveaway. Well, I shouldn't say it's a dead giveaway, but letters of authenticity don't come from, you know, works of art that are typically painted. You see letter of authenticity, you know, for like commemorative plates that are porcelain that people hang on their walls, or, you know, like the World War II Spitfire sort of prints that people have. So it's more of, I think, it's associated, at least in my mind, with things that have been produced in large quantities in a series, as opposed to something that's like an original. Because if it's an original, you just see the signature, you see the impression of the signature, silver, you see the who, what, when, where, if it's an English piece. But I think, you know, certification or any sort of letter of authenticity, I think is meant more for the buyer. Just to sort of feel like you're purchasing a one-of-a-kind item. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that that one-of-a-kind item is important to someone else as it is to you. And, you know, a good example of that is when people go on cruises and, you know, they buy, you know, glass sculptures or even jewelry, and they spend, you know, good dollar value, and it's worth it, the weight of the gold. But then 5, 10, 15 years later, the style of it, you know, is not really something that's desirable any longer. So you're almost getting kind of pennies on the dollar.
Good. Another question. How do you find an ISA appraiser in our area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here in Canada, we have the ISA, the Canadian chapter of the ISA. So you could just do a Google search. You can search for people by their specialty. And you can search for people by their name. So if you're looking for someone, you know, to appraise, we even have someone that does, you know, livestock and equestrian. She lives out in Alberta, I believe. So, you know, there's specialists for basically everything that you can select based on what you're looking to have appraised. And all those appraisers, as I mentioned before, just like myself, were all qualified.
Okay. And a little similar question is, do you have suggestions on what consignment stores or auction houses are best to use for the sale of property?
Yeah, so for personal property, again, here I'm in Ontario now, but you know, in Ontario, I will say like Cowley Abbott does really well with Canadian art in particular. That's all they focus on. They now have it take international art as well, but I always suggest clients use them for that. Waddington's is another local auction house. That's where actually the watch was sold. So watches, I mean, they basically take everything, but silver, porcelain. They're very selective with furniture, rugs, things like that. And then Wilkins is another one in downtown Toronto, and they're really well known for Asian arts. So I think it just depends on what type of object you have. But again, if you reach out to the auction house, they're going to say, well, we only want these pieces, you deal with the rest. And that's why sometimes it's good to work with someone who's independent, because they can, you don't want to be stuck with 3/4 of an estate, you know, and then it's like, what do I do with this, especially in a pandemic where you can't even donate anything right now. And I think actually we were talking about that in series 2. They're not even accepting donations right now. Habitat for Humanity, Furniture Bank, Salvation Army. So, you know, you're kind of stuck because, you know, with every estate, some stuff you want to keep and some stuff you just want to donate. So again, that's why it's good to work with someone who's independent, because they can kind of act like a quarterback and sort of part and parcel things off for you.
Fair enough. Oh, okay. I have another question here. Of the mid-century pieces, are any woods more valuable than others?
Yes, teak and rosewood are the most desirable, I would say, as far as the Scandinavian and the Danish design go. And I mean, gosh, they were masters of their craft. It's just, I mean, when you look at a piece, some people look at it and, oh, it looks like IKEA. But what they don't realize is that's the designs of IKEA were based on these types of designs, and their fluid and their form. You know, everything about it is just right. But you know, Canadians, we did our version of that here. We had, you know, Danish and Scandinavian furniture makers who moved here, So the factory was Canadian technically, but it was a Danish design, and it was a teak or rosewood veneer. And it also does really well because people are just looking for that particular style or that look.
Okay. Okay. Oh, and I had another question that was going to pop up. You mentioned the eBay auctions when you were doing your different markets. Now, you were saying that, you know, prices are driven by the auction, but is it like real estate that's not really the true value? Like, how do I evaluate what something's worth? And would you suggest like selling something independently on eBay auctions, or even, dare I say it, Kijiji, versus, you know, going through appraiser like yourself?
Yeah, so I'm not going to say I don't recommend it. It's a safety thing with Kijiji. You know, you're having someone come to your home, so always have, you know, if that's a route you want to take, you know, have somebody with you. I mean, I've had a client before, unfortunately, where, you know, she was a nice lady, and, you know, she put this table and chairs, and I worked for an auction house at the time, and we said, you know, it's lovely, but, you know, we can't take it. So she put it on Kijiji, and, you know, person phone wanted to see it, and she said, oh, I'm getting, you know, my hair done on Sunday, I won't be here, I'll meet you later. And, you know, she came home, and her place, you know, someone had gone in and kind of, you know, stolen things. So I mean, that's not a great story, but I think we can all learn from that, and you know, just be aware. eBay is different. You are the seller, you are in charge of shipping it, you are in charge of dealing with problems after if they arise. If someone pays for something and then they cancel their payment, that is also something you have to deal with. So people sometimes, you know, they don't read, and they purchase, and then it arrives, oh, well, it said it was 18 inches, but I thought it said 8 inches and I want my money back. So, you know, no one wants to have to deal. I mean, some people enjoy doing it, but it's usually something that they do for business. So I don't know that that's a stress that anyone wants in their life potentially. But as far as eBay auctions go, there's another website I wanted to mention called Live Auctioneers. So it's live, L-I-V-E, auctioneers, plural.com. And it's free. And so all you have to do is provide your email address and create a password. They don't send you any notifications online. And the reason it's a good site to use is because it's all auction. So it's secondary market. It is things that have sold. And so you see the date, you see the auction house, so you can go back and see, like, are these reputable people? What type of stuff? Are we talking like government sale where everything starts at $1, or are we talking about things that are described properly, have been cataloged appropriately? And then you can also see, so there's what we call an auction estimate. So I think I mentioned with that Joseph Albert's The Homage to the Square, that print that was red in the center of those three photographs, that originally estimate was 3,000 to 5,000 Canadian. So if you go on Live Auctioneers right now, you could see where the bidding started and where it ended. So the reason I bring this up is because some auction houses, you know, their style is to estimate things very aggressively. And so you'll see that they estimate it because, you know, they want you to consign it. Oh, it's worth $8,000 to $10,000, but then it sells for $2,000. And then you have other auction houses that estimate things very conservatively, and then they're able to sort of exceed the high end of that estimate. So Live Auctioneers is a good one, again, because it's free and you're able to see all that information in front of you and make a good decision.
Oh, perfect. And there's a lot of kudos to you, Julie, for providing such great information during this session. Not sure when we'll be having another session, but we have this on Facebook Live. So definitely for individuals that you think might be interested, they can go onto Facebook through and look for Parkland Retirement Living, and they'll find this session recorded live to look back and see what information was provided here. And I'm just thought I'd do a last call to see if anyone does have any additional questions for Julie before we end this information session. Anyone? No? Okay. And I think just before we go, first of all, thank you very much, Julie. This was very informative. So thank you for joining us this afternoon for the last of this particular special Parkland Live series. But I also want to let people know, I believe, Winnie, you have a screen of our next event, Parkland Live series. We do this continually about once a month. So the next one we're doing is on June 15th, which is 6 p.m. our time. We're doing a summer meal prep and wine pairing. So if you're unsure what wine should go with your meals, do tune in, as we have some of our executive chefs that will be sharing that information for us. And if anyone likes some more information about Parkland of any of our locations, please go to experienceparkland.com or to register at Parkland, experienceparkland.com live. Sorry, I fumbled there. So I hope everyone had a great afternoon and enjoyed this session. And if you want to spread the word and say, hey, I had this great session with Julie Riches on Parkland Live, go there. Otherwise, enjoy this great weather and hope to see you again soon at another Parkland Live session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.